In 2017, a single photograph changed everything for Joel Osteen. Someone standing outside Lakewood Church in chest-deep floodwater snapped a picture of the locked front doors and posted it online. Within 12 hours, 50 million people had seen it. Within 48 hours, Joel Osteen was trending worldwide, but not for his sermons. The hashtag was Joel Osteen is a fraud. And here's the thing about the internet. It never forgets. Every single day since that photograph went viral, someone new discovers it. Someone new shares it. Someone new realizes that the man who built his entire empire on the phrase, "God wants to bless you," locked his doors while his neighbors were drowning. Joel Osteen has never recovered. And this is the story of how 50,000 people exposed a false prophet in real time, created a permanent record that he cannot delete, and changed the way the world sees prosperity preachers forever. For decades, prosperity preachers controlled every single aspect of their public image. They owned the cameras, they owned the production studios, they owned the broadcasting networks. If Joel Osteen wanted to look like a humble servant of God, he hired professionals to make sure that's exactly what you saw. The Sunday morning broadcast, carefully edited, the interviews, pre-screened questions with approved topics. The book tours, managed appearances with adoring crowds who had waited hours to see him. There was no mechanism for ordinary people to challenge the narrative. If you thought something seemed off about a preacher flying a private jet while preaching about sacrifice, you had no way to show anyone else. You just sat in your living room feeling crazy. The prosperity gospel operated like a one-way mirror. They could see their audience, but the audience could only see what they chose to show. But then came smartphones. Then came Twitter. Then came Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Then came the ability for anyone with a camera to document what they witnessed and share it with millions of people in seconds. The mirror became a window, and what people saw through that window during Hurricane Harvey destroyed an image that took decades to build. The prosperity gospel had survived skeptical journalists. It had survived academic criticism. It had survived former members speaking out on obscure websites that nobody read. But it had never faced anything like what happened on the night of August 27, 2017. Hurricane Harvey made landfall as a Category 4 storm, and then did something hurricanes almost never do. It stalled. For 4 straight days, the storm sat directly over Houston and dumped more than 60 inches of rain on the city. 50,000 homes flooded. 30,000 people needed rescue. 13 million people were affected. It was the worst flooding disaster in American history. And in the middle of this catastrophe, people started posting. The first posts came from neighborhoods near Lakewood Church. Residents wading through chest-deep water. Families trapped on rooftops waving for help. Children being carried through flooded streets on their parents' shoulders. And then someone walked to Lakewood Church, the largest megachurch in America. A building that seats 16,000 people, and found the doors locked. They took a photograph. The massive building, yet completely dry and entirely empty, with its doors closed while the neighborhood drowned around it. That photograph hit Twitter at 9:47 p.m. on August the 27th. By midnight, it had been shared 10,000 times. By morning, it had been shared 100,000 times. By the following evening, 50 million people had seen it. But this wasn't just one photograph. This was hundreds of people, posting in real time, documenting the same thing from different angles. Video of the empty parking lot with no cars in sight. Photos of the locked gates with chains clearly visible. Footage of the dry loading dock where supplies could have been unloaded and distributed. screenshots of the church's social media accounts showing no announcements about shelter services. Resident after resident, confirming what they were seeing with their own eyes. The internet had caught Joel Osteen in real time, and the internet was absolutely furious. Within hours, celebrities with millions of followers were sharing the posts and adding their own commentary. News networks picked up the story and ran segments. The hashtag Joel Osteen is a fraud started trending nationwide. Then came Joel Osteen Challenge, where people mocked him by posting pictures of themselves locking their own doors during emergencies. Saturday Night Live wrote sketches. Jimmy Kimmel made jokes. Stephen Colbert dedicated segments. The entire country was talking about the pastor who locked his doors while his city drowned. Now here's where it gets worse, because everything Joel Osteen did next made the situation exponentially more damaging. His first response was to claim that the church had flooded. He posted a photograph showing water in the lower level and said Lakewood was inaccessible and unsafe. But residents who lived nearby immediately posted their own footage, showing completely dry streets around the building. Then journalists drove to the church and filmed themselves walking through the parking lot without getting their feet wet. One reporter stood in front of the building and pointed to the dry concrete, saying, "This is what Joel Osteen called flooded." He was caught lying. On camera, in real time, with evidence anyone could verify. His second response was to say he was just waiting for the city to ask for help. They needed official coordination, he explained. They wanted to work with emergency services, he said. But other churches had opened their doors without being asked. Mosques had opened their doors immediately. Sikh temples had opened their doors and started cooking meals. The convention center had opened its doors. Even furniture stores had opened their doors. Which brings us to Mattress Mac. Jim Mackingvale owns a chain of furniture stores in Houston called Gallery Furniture. When Harvey hit, he didn't wait for anyone to ask. That he didn't wait for official coordination. He didn't check with emergency services. He opened his showrooms, pushed the furniture aside, and told anyone who needed shelter to come inside immediately. Then he sent his delivery trucks into flooded neighborhoods to rescue people. He personally drove into high water to pull families out. He fed thousands of evacuees with his own money. He set up charging stations so people could contact their families. Mattress Mac became a national hero. The people were crying on camera, thanking him for saving their families. News crews filmed children sleeping on display mattresses, while Mac walked through the aisles making sure everyone had food and water. He spent over $400,000 of his own money in 4 days. And every single story about Mattress Mac mentioned Joel Osteen. Every single headline drew the comparison. Every news segment showed them side by side. A furniture salesman opened his doors immediately and became a hero, while a preacher who talks about God's abundance locked his doors and made excuses. The contrast was devastating, and it was everywhere, permanently. Joel Osteen eventually opened Lakewood as a shelter on Tuesday, a full 3 days after Harvey hit. But by then, the damage was permanent. He went on television to explain himself and somehow made everything worse with every word that came out of his mouth. In one interview, he said, "We have been here for the city of Houston all along," while footage of the locked doors played in a split screen beside his face. In another, he said, "We were just being cautious," while survivors described swimming through their living rooms with their children on their backs. He smiled his usual smile, spoke in his usual tone, and seemed completely disconnected from the suffering his own neighbors had experienced. Every interview, every explanation, every attempt to rehabilitate his image was captured, clipped, and shared by thousands of people who had already made up their minds. The man who had spent 30 years crafting his public image had lost control of the narrative in 12 hours, and nothing he said was going to get it back. But here's what makes this truly permanent. Before social media, scandals faded, people forgot. New stories replaced old ones. Newspapers got thrown away. Broadcasts disappeared. A preacher could weather a controversy, lay low for a year, and come back without anyone remembering what happened. That cannot happen anymore. When you Google Joel Osteen today, Hurricane Harvey appears in the first page of results. When you search his name on Twitter, the locked door photographs are still being shared years later. When you look him up on YouTube, videos about Harvey have millions of views. The record is permanent. The evidence is archived. The receipts exist forever and will never disappear. Every time Joel Osteen does something now, someone brings up Harvey. He bought a yacht. Someone posts the locked doors. He flew private. Someone posts the locked doors. He released a book. Someone posts the locked doors. His wife wore expensive jewelry. Someone posts the locked doors. The internet never stops prosecuting a case it has already decided. And 50 million people decided Joel Osteen's case in August of 2017. What makes this different from previous scandals is the source of the evidence. This wasn't a journalist with an agenda. This wasn't a disgruntled former employee. This wasn't a competitor trying to damage him. This was ordinary people, his own neighbors, documenting what they saw with their own phones and sharing it with no coordination, no plan, no organization whatsoever. It was spontaneous accountability on a scale that had never existed before. And prosperity preachers have absolutely no defense against it. Because here's what the locked doors really exposed. For decades, Joel Osteen preached that God blesses the faithful with abundance, that generosity is rewarded, that helping others is the path to prosperity. He told his congregation to give and they would receive. He told them to sow seeds of faith and reap harvests of blessing. But when the moment came to demonstrate those principles, and when his neighbors were literally drowning outside his church, when the community he claimed to love was in the worst crisis of their lives, he locked the doors and protected his property. The photograph didn't just show a closed building. It showed the gap between the sermon and the life, between the message and the man, between what Joel Osteen tells people to believe and what Joel Osteen actually does when belief is tested. And that gap is now documented forever in millions of screenshots, 80 videos, tweets, and archives that Joel Osteen cannot delete, cannot explain away, and cannot escape no matter how many good deeds he does afterward. Prosperity preachers survived criticism by controlling the narrative. They survived skepticism by curating their image. They survived doubt by surrounding themselves with cameras that only showed what they wanted shown. But they cannot survive ordinary people with smartphones. They cannot survive real-time documentation of their failures. They cannot survive a permanent internet record that anyone can access with a single search. Joel Osteen is still preaching. He still has millions of followers. He still sells books and fills stadiums and appears on television, but he is permanently marked now. Every new follower who Googles his name will find the locked doors. Every skeptic who wants to warn someone has a photograph to share. Every person considering joining Lakewood will see what happened when their pastor was tested. The prosperity gospel told people that faith would be rewarded with blessings. But the internet showed them what happens when a prosperity preacher faces a real test of faith. 50,000 people posted. 50 million people saw. And Joel Osteen became the permanent face of exactly what he spent his entire career trying to hide. The internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive false prophets. It catches on camera. If this is the first Joel Osteen video you've seen, there's something you need to understand about how he built his empire in the first place. That video is on your screen right now. I'll see you there.